In the U.S., some of the world's largest internet companies, plus tech trade groups and activist organizations, are protesting the Federal Communication Commission's rollback of net neutrality protections. Now, visitors to major websites on Wednesday saw a special message about the issue. Now, Twitter promoted the hashtag topic net neutrality, driving it to become a trending topic worldwide. It also put up a blog post with an explainer on the issue and encouraged users to comment directly on the FCC website. Video streaming site Netflix had a banner ad at the top of its homepage, which linked to the group leading the charge against net neutrality rollbacks, called the Internet Association. And while Google didn't promote the issue on its homepage, it blogged about its position. And at Facebook, CEO Mark Zuckerberg wrote a short post criticizing the FCC's proposal. So what is net neutrality? Well, current rules classify internet service providers as common carriers, much like phone networks. So that means it will have to treat all internet traffic equally. The current administration is trying to scrap those rules. Proponents of net neutrality believe it ensures a free and open internet. Tech companies also worry that service providers could treat them unfairly by creating faster delivery lanes for some websites and not for others. Opponents of the rules argue that internet service providers shouldn't be regulated as common carriers, and the government is stifling what should be a free market. Well, for more on this topic, we're joined by technology entrepreneur and lawyer John Snyder, as well as Scott Schober, president of Berkeley Varitronics Systems. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So, John, I'll start with you. Who would you say are the big winners and losers from net neutrality rules being rolled back?
Well, the big winners clearly are the giant tech companies, the Googles, the Amazons, the Netflix, and net neutrality from this perspective is a giant vat of boiling oil that the big players are going to pour right on top of their competitors.
And Scott, do you agree?
Yeah, well, I think certainly the carriers, the broadband carriers, the ISPs, they're looking to have an opportunity where they could control things a little bit more, perhaps have a fast and slow internet, which would allow them really to monetize on it a lot better. So if they do roll these things back, the net neutrality, as the FCC is now proposing, then certainly these broadband and ISPs would be winners there, and they could monetize on it much better. Who's going to suffer? Well, it could potentially certainly be consumers, because if now we lose control as a consumer and we're sitting there and that wheel of death is spinning and we're trying to watch a movie or something else, it could get very frustrating, and we have to pay a premium to get what we currently get now that's open and free.
So, John, then essentially, what does the internet look like then if net neutrality is scrapped?
Well, it's going to look like it's looked for the last 20 to 25 years. Keep in mind, the internet grew to what it is in a essentially unregulated environment, and that has led to great innovation. So I don't see the panic. It's been unregulated. It should continue to be unregulated.
And Scott, would you say that's the case, that it'll be the same as usual if this happens?
Well, certainly John makes a good point. Some things will be the same. Look at this, from the beginning of the internet, back in the early 90s till about 2015, when net neutrality law was enacted, $1.5 trillion was spent in just the infrastructure. That's an amazing amount of money. Is that going to stop and suddenly go away? No, to John's point, certainly it's not, but it could stifle growth. It could cause some difficulties there. So those things have to be weighed out. But again, why is the FCC chairman behind this? Keep in mind, he is a former Verizon lawyer. There's a lot of lobbyists and a lot of money that from the large telcos and broadband providers, ISPs, that are lobbying to have these things changed. So there's a lot of battle back and forth here. So it'll be interesting what the comments from the public are to the FCC and whether or not the FCC will change its opinion after this unfolds in the next week or so.
And speaking of lobbying, we know that major tech firms like Google, Amazon, and Facebook clearly speaking out against it. How much clout could or should they have in what's happening with net neutrality?
Well, there's going to be, they have a ton of clout because they have a ton of money. In terms of how much clout should they have, I think people need to remember that the internet was built by free enterprise, free competition, and people able to go out and freely innovate. And net neutrality cuts against that, and that is something that we should be concerned about.
So, Scott, some people would just say, hey, this is good for competition. What's your take on that assessment?
It could be. It depends on whose perspective you're from. If you think of the average American, and by and large, the average American is for net neutrality, it should be said. And there's about 80,000 websites that we're promoting today net neutrality and to really keep things the way they are. So there's a lot stronger push to keep things the way they are instead of changing and rolling back. So just to make that point. But the average American only has one choice, one ISP perhaps. What happens to them when they want to access content? That's difficult. And now suddenly they get price gouged. They have no control. They have nowhere else to go. That could be very, very frustrating. Unless you're in a large city with a lot of choices, it could hit your wallet, and that's not good for Americans.
And not just choice, there's also this issue being raised about free speech. There are concerns that some of these service providers can now block or slow down access to certain content or from certain communities that may not have a voice in mainstream media. So, John, what's your take on how this could affect free speech?
Well, again, I think a free, open internet is what everybody wants. And to Scott's point, while net neutrality, that phrase, is a great marketing term, it's not reality. There's nothing neutral about it. What we should be trying to avoid is the government regulation of the internet, and people who are concerned with the present government should be especially interested in keeping the government out of the internet.
So then, to that point then, Scott, should it be the government or should it be service providers then who really get to determine the sort of content that we get to view?
That's a sticky one there. Everybody knows and probably agrees, as John mentions, overregulation by the government can be a disaster. It's proven itself in the past, so I'm no proponent of that. But there does need to be some degree of regulation, be it, is it the ISP, is it another third party? You would think that the FCC would be more balanced in their response here, and hopefully they will weigh in all of the various comments, be it the activists, be it the consumer, be it the broadband and the ISP companies that are weighing all their voices in so heavily. You need somebody to balance that out and make a fair judgment, ultimately to the consumer who's paying the bill for all of this.
And John, as a tech entrepreneur, do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, I think Scott makes an excellent point. That there does need to be a method of allocating resources. However, I would respond by saying that the free market is the best way that man has ever invented to allocate resources efficiently. It is the reason that we have the wonderful internet we have now. Technology and innovation is going very, very, very fast in this area, and I think the government getting into the middle of it is just going to mess it up. It's not going to help anybody.
And Scott, do you think that's fair? I know that we mentioned the government. Is this going to mess this up if the government does step in?
I have to concur there. When the government steps in or oversteps, it will, because the government is a number of years behind typically on technology. Keep in mind, the internet as we know it today is very different than it was a few years ago. And this point is going to change radically in the next couple of years. Things are going to change, especially as we're all dependent upon mobile devices. What we're currently dealing with, the 4G, fourth generation LTE speeds, they're going to be 100 times faster when we get to the fifth generation technology. So there's going to be a huge shift away from our traditional computers and internet access to mobile devices. That huge shift is going to open up all new laws, regulations, and things are going to change drastically. So they got to get it right now, or they're going to really mess it up downstream.
I'm sure people are bracing for change. Thank you so much, John Snyder, technology entrepreneur and lawyer, and Scott Schober, president and CEO of Berkeley Varitronics Systems.